Hello, everybody. Great to see you today. John is here as our making sure everything happens, right? Our co-host, and
that's me. Yes, thank you.
That's you. And if you're here to hear about the gig economy and from Gretchen Hartke, you are in the right place. This is a great place to be. I'm Allison Carter. I'm the Vice President of Talent Management at the Care Group. And I think it was a month ago, I called Gretchen and said, hey, have you heard about L&D Cares? Could you get involved? As I've been a part of this growing community, a lot of folks I've been talking about that are in career transition are thinking a couple things. You know, what's next for me? Do I be a consultant? Do I work with a company like you? Do I create my own single shingle? And I said, okay, you guys have got to pick up my friend Gretchen's book. So you want to join the gig economy. And so Gretchen and I go way back. I was a client of hers. We've worked together. I've learned so much from her. And not only as an instructional designer, as a human being, as a warm, gentle person, she is just a wonderful person. The last time we saw each other was over pancakes in the Chicago suburbs. And she is now relocated to San Diego, California, where hopefully she spends a lot of time on her sailboat. But when she's not, she's spending a lot of time solving her clients' problems and being an amazing instructional designer as the owner of Hartke Designs. So, Gretchen, thank you so much for being part of this community and for sharing your story today. I think a lot of people will learn a lot from it.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Allison, for inviting me, and John and Mike being here in the background, helping support. So let me tell you real quickly how this is going to go. I'm going to introduce myself really quickly and share my story. I've got a few slides that I'm going to go through to just sort of share kind of some of my big hitter tips. And then we're going to spend most of our time in a Q&A format where you'll be able to put your questions into the Q&A. And I'll answer as many of your questions as I possibly can. So before I share my slides, I'll just start by introducing myself. So as Allison mentioned, I used to be in Chicago. I now live in San Diego. And I started my career 20 years ago as a middle school teacher, and decided after a few years of teaching that I didn't want to be in the classroom for my entire career. So I went to graduate school and got my master's in instructional systems technology at Indiana University. And then right out of grad school, went to work in an entry-level position as an instructional designer at Walgreens outside of Chicago, which is what took me to Chicago. And I was at Walgreens for a few years, loved it. It was a great company to kind of start my corporate learning life, and then decided I wanted to go see the services side of the work that we do. So I went to work for a small boutique learning company in Chicago called Type A Learning Agency, which unfortunately did not make it through the 2008-2009 financial crisis. But when it was kind of clear that Type A was gonna close its door, I decided at that point that I was just going to go for it and hang out a shingle, and really thought 13 years ago that I was going to just be an instructional designer for hire, just find projects and put together a year. And I did that for the first 3 to 5 years of Hartke Designs, which is the name of my business. And after I don't know, it just sort of, my client base started growing, and my clients really were asking me to take on bigger projects. And so I started taking bigger projects and really shifted my business model to be more of a collaboration with other fellow independent consultants. So at this point, Hartke Designs, I have a bench of about 30 fellow independent consultants who are instructional designers, project managers of learning initiatives, storyline developers, lectora developers, animators, graphic designers, voice talent, etc. And I really, when a client comes to me with a project need, I put together a team to really help meet that need. with all fellow independent consultants. And so that's really what my business has been doing for the last, let's say, 7 to 10 years. And I just rinse and repeat that every year because I love the variety and I love what I do. So that's a little context about kind of how I came to be in this world. And I'm going to get my PowerPoint up here. I had it up. Where are you? Apologies. I was practicing earlier.
That's right. We're all pivoting and learning new skills in the moment.
Yes, and AirMe is new for me.
Yeah.
Where did it go? Oh, there it is. Okay. Share my screen. All right. So tell me, Allison, can you see my slide?
I can see it. Perfect.
Okay. So I want to start just very quickly defining for you how I define gig economy. It kind of means different things. One part of the gig economy is more like all the app-based, like Airbnb, Rover, TaskRabbit, kind of that. There's that kind of gig economy. I'm using the term gig economy a little bit differently. So I define the gig economy as a way of working that's based on people having temporary jobs or doing separate pieces of work, each of those pieces paid separately rather than working for an employer. So my perspective is I kind of cobble a year together with a collection of projects or gigs to make up the amount of revenue that I need to make in any given year to reach my personal financial goals. And that's really what drives how much work I do in any given year. So that when I say gig economy, and when you read my book, if you read my book, and I'm referring to the gig economy, that's what I'm talking about. It's really that professional, independent contractor way of working. I'm going to give you kind of 3 of my big tips, and then we're going to go right into Q&A. So my first big tip is that I think it's important if you're considering making the leap to become an independent consultant, in this learning world or whatever professional service you or expertise you might have. But I know I'm talking to learning professionals in this context. So the first thing I would say is I think it's important to have a well-established area of expertise for which you're known for by your network. Because when you go out on your own at the beginning, one of the first things that you're probably going to do is really tap into your network. And so you don't want it to be very hard for them to imagine that, like, oh yeah, I know Gretchen's an instructional designer, so of course this is natural. This is an expertise she has. So this makes perfect sense that she's doing it. If you don't have that well-established connection of your expertise and your network, you're going to have to work a little bit harder to kind of help people imagine why they would hire you for the thing that you are, saying that you can do for them. So that's my first kind of big tip. And it seems kind of obvious, but I think, sometimes I talk to people who are a little bit earlier in their career, and they kind of maybe just want to go right to independent consulting, which is not impossible. It's just a little bit of it's a heavier lift to get going. And so that's one thing that I think it's important to really be real about with yourself if you are imagining making the leap. Another tip that I would really, that helped me early on when I started, I was like 8 years into my official professional career when I went out on my own. In that first 8 years of my career, I really spent a lot of time networking and just meeting people. I sat on boards of local chapters of, not ATD, of ISPI. At the time, they're no longer in Chicago. They don't have a chapter anymore, but, and was active in ATD and really just made some really authentic connections with people in the profession. And so I just knew a lot of people in the learning and development space, so that the day that I had to pivot because my company was closing, I had like the first 20 people I could call because I had 8 years of knowing people. And so I think it's really important, if you're in a situation where you're like, I think I might want to do this at some point in the future, what I would say to you is start really networking with that goal in mind before you need something, and then continually cultivate and maintain your network. I always, I'm just really direct and straightforward. When somebody comes out of my network that I haven't talked to for 20 years or 15 years, and they've lost their job or whatever, and I haven't heard from them, I haven't talked to them, and then they just show up asking me for something, that is always a little bit hard for me. I understand why they're doing it, and I try to be graceful and give them grace, but it feels a little disingenuous or inauthentic. Like they have been nowhere and now they're here. And when I've been in situations where I've sort of like, I'm reaching out to somebody to like ask them or to sell to them, it feels kind of creepy a little bit because I haven't talked to them. And I don't know. And it just doesn't feel authentic. So I've really tried to maintain connections with people in a real authentic way. And that's made selling for me really natural. For 13 years, I've never made a cold call in 13 years. My business is very referral based, and it all is because of like having authentic connections with people. And like, I wasn't networking to like start a business. I was networking to just know colleagues and just be connected and be part of a community and a conversation. So if you're in a situation where you haven't done that and now you need to pivot, that is okay. All is not lost, but it still is something to sort of keep in mind of like, how can you have it be authentic? And if people have questions about that, I've got ideas. And if that's you and you want me to kind of poke around and explore more, we can definitely go there in the Q&A. My third tip, and then we're going to move right to Q&A. So be thinking about your questions that you might want to ask. My third tip is, so all of that was sort of like things that helped me really hit the ground running early in my life as an independent consultant. This one is what has helped me be a successful consultant in my whole 13 years of my career. And that is that I really encourage you not to commit or to commit to work only if you know you can really knock that work out of the park. I have found it is so much better to say no, even though that's hard, than to disappoint. Because if you say no to a client because you just don't have the capacity to take the work, and you explain like, I know if I took this project right now, I would not be doing you a service. And so, I only want to do good work for you. So I have to let this opportunity fly by. They may not like that in that moment, but they're not going to not come back. But if you say yes, and then you don't land the plane on the project, they're never going to come back. So I've really tried to have a lot of integrity in knowing up front, are we going to be able to really fulfill this project and like be the Hartke designs that they're expecting? And if I know in my heart of hearts that is not the case, then I have to say no to the project. And hopefully I can refer it away to people in my network, which is a way to contribute to people so that then when you need something later, it makes it easier to go to that person and ask them for what you need because you've helped them in the past. So those are kind of, as I was reflecting on like, what are 3 things that really helped me kind of in the trajectory of my whole arc of being an independent consultant for 13 years. Those are kind of 3 of the big hitters. So when I wrote this book, I did not write this book. I literally make $3.43 on every book I sell. So this is not a money-making venture. I wrote this book because I had many new consultants kind of just reaching out to say, hey, I'm thinking about it. And there was one week where I had 3 of these conversations like in the course of 2 days. And I basically said the same things over and over. And I thought, I should just write this down. And so at the time, my now husband, which is why I live in San Diego, he lived in San Diego. I lived in Chicago. So I was flying back and forth for a year and a half while we were dating. So I wrote this book on airplanes going back and forth from Chicago to San Diego. So, but when I think about all of those conversations that really inspired me to even put these thoughts down on paper, the questions kind of fell into these 4 buckets. And so you certainly can ask me any question. I hope you're getting that I'm kind of an open book about things. But, you know, people kind of want to know about like, what are the good things and the bad things and the things. Sometimes people, you know, want some thought partnership on, you know, is the freelance life right for me? Some people are closer to that decision and they know they want to make the leap. So they've got some pretty tactical questions about that. And then sometimes people are early or they're imagining and they've got questions kind of about the business side of things, selling, finding projects, rates, space, you know, support, etc. So any question is open for.
It looks like we've got questions coming in too, Gretchen.
Great.
So.
Yeah. So whoever, I can't see
a few.
Great. So I don't see the Q&A. So you guys let me know.
Here's the first one that I'll let John and Mike string in too. So what has it been like depending on your network of experts? You know, you mentioned the 30 people, you know, were there times when they didn't meet your expectations, and how did you handle that?
So Allison, I don't totally understand that question. Is it that like I reached out to my network and they didn't respond?
I guess it's, you know, you bring people in to help you. So when they're not, so you say yes or no,
got it.
And you bring people in. So when these folks that are working with you, how do you handle that? Yeah.
Yeah. So in 13 years, I've had to ask 2 people off a project. So the first thing I would say is because my network is deep and pretty well known to me, I at the beginning, I hired people and put people on projects that I knew really well. And trusted and sort of knew that I was aligned and knew that was going to work. As my company has grown and I've taken more projects, I have brought people who I haven't known so much, like I've never worked with them before. So the 2 people I've had to ask off of projects, I realized in reflection, I didn't do a great job of like really digging into their portfolio with them. And I didn't do a great job checking references. I was sort of moved too quickly that, you know, even in this context, that hire slow, fire fast, that applies in this. And sometimes I've moved a little too fast to hire. So I would say, you know, number 1, do really good vetting early on to make sure that the people that, if you're in a situation where you're bringing people onto a project, that you are really aligned with them. The second thing is when you kick off a project, be really clear about what your expectations are. And the nice thing is when you're working with contractors, if they're not meeting the expectations, I mean, obviously have those feedback conversations and, you know, give them feedback and give them a chance. But the nice thing about working with fellow independents is I'm not here to like make sure that you're growing professionally. Like you got to do that for yourself. So, you know, as soon as I sort of realize I've got a problem and it's not going to get better, I move pretty quickly to move those people off the project, which isn't easy.
You know, there's a question here. There's a question here around, you know, there's some folks that maybe have transitioned from careers where they've been there for a long time, the bulk of their career, perhaps in a, you know, you work for Walgreens. So does that help or hinder you as you're transitioning into consulting or gig work?
It was huge for me. And Walgreens is still a really big client for me. And it's so much the case because I have those deep connections from 20 years ago. There frankly hasn't been a day in my professional life that I haven't somehow been on a Walgreens project in 20 years, even when I worked at the consulting firm. So that, you know, because I left Walgreens on really good terms and deeply connected to people, that I was able to use that in my favor. And so that's been really important. And in fact, if I went across, I did this exercise a couple years ago where I looked across all of my clients over that, at that time it was 10 years. All of those, no, I'd say 80% of those clients were tied to people I met those first 3 years of my career at Walgreens. They're either people that I worked with and they've now gone on to work at other companies and other learning departments, and I've just kept in touch with them. I've hired many people that I met in those first 3 years working at Walgreens. So for me, it was hugely instrumental. And that's not the case for everybody, but for me, that was very big. Or they referred me to somebody else in their network. So it all kind of, Walgreens is my Kevin Bacon. 6 degrees of separation.
I have one of those too. In my background. Hey, a couple questions. I know you do a lot of networking, right? Which is what you talked about in your tips. But somebody is asking about the gig sites. Do you have any advice or thoughts on these gig sites?
Yeah. So when I first started out, I think organizations like Allison's, like Kara Group, and other which that's, you guys aren't a gig site, but organizations that take learning and development talent and match them to projects. Be connected to all of those companies, and I talk about some of them in a chapter in my book. That when you're just getting started, and if you don't have a deep network that you can just start leveraging, those are great resources. What you will probably find if you continue on is, that may be great and you just kind of stay working like that for your whole career, or you might pivot and sort of have a portfolio that's some projects that are, through placement type organizations or websites. And then you just start cultivating your own client base. Ultimately, you're going to make more money if you can sell directly to the client because nobody's taking a piece of it. But if you're just getting started and you don't have a big network, or you're maybe not interested in like running a business, you just want to do the work, those are some really great resources and play a very important role in our industry.
Yeah, I had a question about what percent of the time are you running the business, right? You're a very talented instructional designer, and getting to do that really creative work.
Yeah. So I am now in the last year, I'm probably only really an instructional designer about 20% of the time. I'm a project manager, another 60%. And then I'm running the business, like selling, writing proposals, dealing with the accountant, which is right now tax time, 20% of the time. But that's really just been a shift in the last couple of years. Prior to that, I was billable in either project management or instructional design. I was billable at like 70 to 80% of my hours. So the nice thing about this life is you really get to design it for yourself. And you really get to say what's going to work for you and how you want to spend your time.
I hate to do this because it's been such a great conversation, but unfortunately we've run out of time. There was one more, and there's a few more questions in the chat. So what we'll do is we'll copy those and send those to you, Gretchen, and then you can connect with the good people that ask these questions.
I would love that. Yeah, I'll absolutely do that.
But someone asked where you can get their. I think Corey was asked where the book is. Where do you get the book?
Hey,
You're way ahead of me. Way ahead of me.
Thank you for asking. It's available on Amazon. But you can also download the first chapter on my website, hartkedesigns.com.
All right, brilliant. Well, thank you.